Hello, this is Kopi Time, a podcast series on markets and economies from DVS Group Research. I'm Taimur Beg, Chief Economist, welcoming you to our 126th episode. Today, it's all about AI, and to be more specific, about generative AI. We will hear about the subject of the moment from Microsoft's Asia Head of Business Development, Zia Zaman. Zia has had decades of experience on growth and innovation, both at Microsoft and previously at MetLife's Lumen Lab and a whole bunch of other companies here in Asia. Zia Zaman, welcome to Kopi Time.
Wonderful to be here, Taimur. Thank you so much.
It's great to have you, Zia. I'm going to start out a bit provocatively. The iPhone was rolled out in mid-2007, and I recall distinctly that by the end of 2008, from the hardware production ecosystem to the smartphone app development business, not to mention the way we communicated fundamentally, there was a full-blown mobile revolution in the world. Now, it's been about the same span of time since ChatGPT came into our consciousness, late 2023. Has the world been transformed in a comparable manner?
I think it really has, Taimur, and thank you for asking. I think the iPhone moment was, for me, the biggest and maybe the only major disruption we had in the 2000 to 2015 timeframe. I actually think that that decade, the noughts, was probably one of the least productive times for tech. We had tremendous growth in tech as a result of the transistor, of mainframes, of client server, of the PC revolution. And then we hit the doldrums. And the single bright light was the mobile revolution. And in many ways, I would liken what we're seeing with generative AI. And we know AI has been around for 50 or 60 years, but the generative AI moment to be even greater in terms of the change that it might have on work, on the way in which we live and the way in which we communicate. It's still a tool, but I liken it perhaps more to the 1994 Netscape moment, or even I see the parallels back to the printing press in terms of it enabling a different set of language, a different way of thinking about how we do things, and a different type of, if you will, intelligence.
Are we doing things fundamentally differently already, or you are talking in aspirational terms?
I think that there are so many examples of companies that are doing things differently already, and yet we're still so early in this journey. If there's one thing that I would like your listeners to think about, is that we haven't seen anything yet. There is a rule which is sometimes attributed to Bill Gates, which he actually didn't say. It's actually the Amara rule, which is that we overestimate the amount of change that will happen in 1 or 2 years and underestimate the amount of change that will happen over 10 years. And when you think about this comes from the Institutes for the Future, it has proven to be true over and over again. We are in year 2 of 10. And in that principle, the year 1 and year 2 change is sometimes overblown. I worked for Gartner for 3 years. There's a hype cycle in terms of the expectations. But what happens as any technology matures is that you start to see the benefits through this second half of that decade, if you will. And in that year of 10 principle, I do want to say that we haven't seen the amount of change that we will yet, but you have to remember that the first iPhone, people said, looked like an iPod with a screen. And it was only until the Appstore unlocked a lot of value did we finally get the explosion, not just of users, but of different ways in which we use it. And the Appstore itself was from NTT Docomo. They were the first to establish something like that. So it builds upon build upon build. And eventually what we will get is the kind of change that I think we're talking about.
Yeah, I completely concur with you, but I'm just going to play devil's for just
Please
another
do.
second, which is in the last few years, we've had a few other hype cycles around, and I think it's kind of unfair to say they're hype cycles because I think there's something genuinely foundational about those developments, but they just didn't become as big or ubiquitous. I'm thinking about the metaverse or the blockchain around cryptocurrencies and so on. What gives you confidence that this wave of technology adoption will be far bigger, to your point that you haven't seen anything yet, it's going to be far more consequential?
That's a great point. And many of us have thought about the promise of sort of decentralized computing. And I've done a lot of work around distributed ledger technology and what that might do. And yet the obstacles to roll out for that particular technology hit a wall. And when it came to the metaverse, there is potential in the future as well. But for now, I think that what we're seeing is two steps forward, one step back. They are big unlocks, as will be energy. I think that the big unlocks around energy will open up fundamentally new economies and opportunities for us. They may drive marginal costs down to zero. But when you really think about how different it is, decentralized computing gave us a different model for thinking about how we might organize. Cryptocurrency was kind of a bet against the US dollar in many ways, as the reserve currency of the world. And the metaverse, I'm a big fan of Ready Player One, watched it, read it, and do believe that there's a cautionary tale in there. But there's something dystopian about where some of those technologies are leading us to. Whereas I fundamentally think of this tool as maybe more utopian in unlocking more types of value. And if you go to the printing press, it unlocked a democratic way of thinking about the dissemination of knowledge. It gave us tools, the internet that is, at the beginning, that would allow more people to democratize. If there's a second thing that I want the people of this podcast to remember is how inclusive some of the technologies are that we are going to help develop. And I don't mean our company, I mean the people that are our partners that are doing great work on top of the platform. And if I don't give enough examples by the end of the hour around the inclusive nature of tech today, then stop me and I will try.
Zia, you've touched on a bunch of threads, utopia, dystopia. I certainly want to unpack with you later, but you also talked about cost. So I want to sort of delve into that a little bit. The numbers that I see from your company and a bunch of other tech leading companies, it's just mind boggling. Tens of billions of dollars, not just this year. The plan is to spend tens of billions of dollars every year for the rest of the decade, if not longer. So the investment going into operationalizing and commercializing large language model is just astonishing. Why is it so costly? Give us a sense of where the money is going.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think one of the things that we are recognizing is it is so prohibitively costly to build and run these models that it cannot be done at scale by hundreds or thousands of people. It will probably be a handful, under 10 companies that will put in the tens of billions of dollars in order to build the infrastructure to train and deploy these models. And you think about that as just the minimum efficient scale to run the model. And that floor just keeps going up and up and up. And it's partly as a result of the exponential benefit that comes from scale when it comes to learning. Now, let's remember what the large language model does is it makes a prediction about the next best word that is statistical. And when that statistical prediction gets better as a result of having more parameters or inputs, it just simply means that n plus one prediction is so much better when n is large. And therefore, we're in a bit of a race to see how quickly we can build out the smarter and smarter supercomputer, for lack of a better word. And that scale is daunting. When you look at the financial statements, you think about how are we going to absorb the CapEx investment, having been a software company for so long that is really built on OpEx. We are now an OpEx and CapEx company. And yet I look at this as a first world problem, is really that we have the benefit of being one of those few companies that will spend that CapEx in order to deliver services that we can't even foresee in the future that will deliver value. One way of putting it, and this is something that Bill Gates said, I think, originally, which is the value of a platform needs to be 10 times greater for our partners than the value that we capture from it. And in so many ways, I think that the value that or the investment that we're putting into building this platform should clearly unlock significantly more than 10 times the value when you think about the broader economy. Whereas previous computing waves may have been limited to more of an IT sector, the thinking about, and nobody really knows, about the addressable market for the ways in which AI will unlock value in every sector are significantly greater. So as much as this CapEx looks daunting, it truly is what's required for us to be able to deliver the value in the back half of that decade I spoke of.
Right. Zia, allow me to go on a bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
It is related to this issue of the very high cost of rolling out Gen AI models, which is the cost of innovation. In economics, we have this long-standing sort of, almost comical observation that technology is everywhere except in productivity. That from the 1970s onward, we've had a bit of a downshift in productivity. Few times here and there, perhaps around the dawn of the internet age, we saw some pickup in productivity, but by and large, in the industrial world, productivity has been disappointing. And one argument, among many arguments, is that it's just that, we have sort of exhausted the low harvesting fruits, and now any tangible innovation is very, very costly. Does it have to be like that? I mean, do you have to always spend hundreds of billions of dollars to bring prosperity to the world going forward because we've kind of scraped the bottom of the barrel already?
I don't think so. I think that this particular rollout is at an infrastructure layer, which then enables people who are building on top of the platform to use less money to deliver productivity gain. I just saw this morning an example of how we can take people who have low or no vision and give them, through the tools that we have with GPT-4 and beyond, the ability to interact and see the world, unlocking a lot of that productivity gain that doesn't require very much in terms of additional cost on top of it. So once we've built out the railroad or the interstate system or whatever it might be that creates the fluidity in the economy, then the productivity unlock, I think, happens in terms of the innovation in every sector. So in financial services, it might be better eKYC or micro moment lending. It might be a deeper understanding of thin file customers. And I'll use my first inclusion example, which is a company called Trusting Social. A partner of ours is thinking in Vietnam and beyond about how it might deliver those micro moments of credit through a generative AI interface, Timur, that gives us a deeper understanding about where we can do lending or provide protection products in the moment that's significantly better than the ways we've done it in the past. And I think that ability to create value through productivity or thinking differently about a problem is where the initial investment will seem like, okay, now I understand why we built that, and now the things that we need to do to unlock in the future are going to be less. But your point is extremely well taken, which is it still seems like we haven't gotten to the point where productivity is accelerating. In fact, you might argue that it has been decelerating. And that does go back to my earlier point about 2000 to 2015. I shrug when I think about the true technological advance in science and engineering. But since about 2015 to this moment, these are really the golden years. And I'm very keen to talk about the idea around GenAI in science, and in particular around the idea of discovery and design. We don't know how the design of new things will improve as a result of the discoveries that GenAI now enables us to make. And a simple example was around batteries. And if you don't mind, I'll share this story, even though it's a bit of a Microsoft story, which is that we were working on how we could potentially figure out new battery discoveries. And that would have taken years. But fundamentally, with the PNNL, which is in Washington State, we were testing a new battery material, right? And fundamentally, what we were thinking about doing was thinking about 32 million different possibilities. The AI narrowed it down to about 500,000 stable materials, and then narrowed it down even further to 18 promising candidates. So fundamentally, it did all that trial for us to go from 32 million to 18. And then those 18 could be built in the real world, in the atomic world, and then tested. And then one of them turned into a breakthrough battery technology that will then design something that will help unlock value. And that could have been years, but has now happened in days as a result of the AI basically saying, no, we're just going to, push our way through this particular battery design. And our competitors at Google, with the DeepMind effort, have always been one of the shining lights in terms of the use case of protein folding, solved significantly faster than we all thought. And we and a number of other companies are working at the protein level and then even at a nano level to figure out how we might design new drugs and new therapies that will improve health outcomes. So I go back to this idea that the productivity gain that we might see in all the other fields, when it comes from energy or education, from banking to healthcare, are unlocked by this $200 billion of capex that we're going to see hit the financial statements of companies like ours for the next little while. But we've seen this happen in history before, and it has worked before. And I'm not just being an optimist. I truly do believe that as a tool, this is something that has been greater than many of the other things that we've seen in a long time.
So akin to Eisenhower's interstate highway program in the 50s, or laying submarine cables to connect the world through internet in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah, I think that those are good metaphors, and I think that the railways is also a good metaphor, and any other infrastructure, the internet itself, the DARPA's development. And to go back to the printing press, because it is a tool, right, in the hands of humans to do things that we could not predict, and education and maybe even art is super interesting in how it might be unlocked, which we didn't think of 2 years ago. The creative side of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as you know, I have an 11-year-old. I'm excited about an infinitely patient AI teaching him hard math skills, which, will be unmatched by any teachers, even the most patient teacher. That's what I'm looking forward to on the education side of GenAI application. Zia, tell me about the 5 phases of GenAI.
Great, thanks. And I don't think this is necessarily the 5 phases, perhaps, but it is, again, a way of thinking about this decade that we might be in. And it has 5 steps to it. And without sharing this on the screen, I think people can visualize something that which looks like an exponential curve, where the x-axis is time, or some sort of level of automation, and then the y-axis is value, like just how much value do we deliver from it. And we are still in, like, I can call it a 5-3-2 model, but we're still in that first 5 years, where in the current phase of AI, and the first 2 steps there are conversational AI and maybe business knowledge. Then we will move into the second third, if you will, where skills for work and then sort of reasoning and problem solving will start to kick in. And then finally, we'll get to the last phase where we'll get self-learning. Now, I'll step through these pretty quickly because, I recognize this is a podcast and not a presentation. But look, the interfaces of the past have usually been mechanical or punch cards, keyboards, gesture interfaces like the mouse, trackpad, touchscreen. We are already starting to see GenAI use conversational interfaces that are more natural and more human-like. And in many ways, we in Asia have known this for quite some time. It isn't just about typing into a window and then generating a response. We want our conversational AI to be multilingual, multimodal, spoken in one language, responded to in another, over an Android phone, over a weak connection that's underpowered, on the back of a motorbike. So the ways in which we in Asia demand AI to be used so that it is applicable and useful require a conversational approach and not full literacy or numeracy in English. And so we're getting there. And we saw a couple of things that have happened in the last couple of years, a couple of days even, or weeks, around how we've tried to think about this to be more conversational. So how will it help? I mean, it just basically makes it more accessible. Someone once said, English is the hottest new programming language. Where does this go is really in terms of the idea around workforce, right? And the idea is that we are using this as a tool to improve our productivity, but in many ways, our time. Hours of the day are spent on doing tasks that can be routinized or can be done to summarize, to analyze, to log, to shorten creation time. And this idea that we're doing some of the same things, but in shorter periods of time, or with the assistance of some other type of tool, perhaps a little bit like a calculator, if you think of it that way, or another type of tool in whatever field that you're in, basically transforms and accelerates and assists the way we work to succeed in the modern work phase, right? But then as we go into phases 3 and 4, what we really get into is this idea that you get domain specific skills for work. And that is when an agent maybe takes over some of the things that you might have had a group of humans or tools do. And that agent can act on behalf of a company, a function, or an individual to perform a task. It could be something like credit scoring or underwriting. It could be something as simple as organizing a set of information. And those skills for work will then start to be more advanced in terms of how they might reorganize the org chart, for example. It gets exciting for me in that fourth phase where we start to do planning. And I don't mean we, but I just generally think that the tools start to do planning about what it is that they're going to need to learn in order to solve the problem. Up till now, we've given them a problem. If they had that skill, they basically figure out how to do it faster than we did, 99, faster than 99% of humans. But when you give them the ability to plan out and figure out how they learn and reason in order to solve an open-ended problem, then that's when you start to get to more of an advanced phase. This is, again, phase 4 of reasoning and problem solving. Finally, the last phase, self-learning, is when the agents and when the artificial intelligence learns new skills that we didn't tell it to learn, not just because we gave it a task, but because it realizes that it can, and it develops a more generalized intelligence. So the G moves from the beginning of the word to the center of the world, and we enter into the artificial general intelligence phase, or AGI. And that will unlock potentially a lot of different ways in which the marginal cost of many things drops down to close to zero. And I'm a big believer that humanity will still persist, even in the presence of AGI. If there's one thing I'm going to end with, is that when we even get to that point where we have processes and tools and agents that do some of the more menial things, we'll be outsourcing these things to AGI, but still valuing time or unique human abilities. We may have a reappreciation for craft, for artisanry, recognition and reward for creation. Empathy and mental and physical health will spike. People will still need to seek help and seek support. We love competition. We love love and the enjoyment of drama. I think that we're going to have an adaptation and evolution of what it means to, frankly, to be human. And maybe our standards for what we want out of humanity will rise in 10 years. Another way of putting it is that the things that we thought were just sort of very difficult to do 20, 30 years, maybe not in our lifetime or our careers, now all of a sudden they could happen 5, 7, 10 years earlier. And we might be living in a time where we solve nuclear fusion, one of my favorites, either through a new tokamak reactor design or through some other types of means. We accelerate the process by which we come up with the discoveries we need in climate tech to solve some of the issues around energy sooner. And that hope, that optimism that we unlock some of these things that we don't even know about yet through AI and through the combination of humans using AI in interesting ways in each of these verticals gets us to that point where we're solving big, big problems like education, like health outcomes, like inclusivity, and of course, like energy, renewable energy, sooner rather than later.
Sure. When you were talking about the final phases of AI, I was thinking about Iron Man and how Tony Stark interacts with Jarvis, where Jarvis is not necessarily all-knowing, but is an incredible complement to Tony Stark's brilliance and helping him solve problems in speed that is not humanly possible. So I'm not really sure Jarvis needs to have AGI or a very advanced form of GenAI is good enough. But that's what I was thinking about, Zia, when you were talking about that.
You read one of my previous slides. I have a slide that says, and it's got Tony Stark saying, it'll be more like Jarvis and it'll be like Terminator. And so you read my mind on that one. And I'll throw out to the team, like I love to end this particular phase of this discussion around genius. All right. And I'll ask the audience to think about what is the next best word that comes to their mind when I start with this particular line. The first two words are misery loves.
It's always company.
It's company. So I've done this in a variety of contexts. In some context of younger people don't know what the word might be, but the suggestion that it is company is a moment of genius from when it was first written in 1600 by William Shakespeare. And since then, any tool, any reference, even any AI is just holding a mirror up unto what it is that we have done and saying that the next best, most likely word for misery loves is company. But until the great bard wrote that word, it would not be suggested amongst the 10,000 English words as the next best answer. So we will still have moments of genius that will then embed themselves into the corpus from which the AI can then say, maybe the next word is company.
Very good. Zia, you talked about one of your dreams being, clean nuclear fusion and so on. Well, we're not there yet. And therefore, right now, we're still burning a lot of fossil fuel and some renewables to power our current and aspiring world. So let's talk about the compute needs and the carbon footprint of running GenAI models.
There's no doubt that they are high and that the potential for them to grow at less fast a pace is clearly there. So we care very much at Microsoft about our Scope 3 emissions. Of course, Scope 1 and 2 is super important, and those have dropped. But Scope 3 continues to rise. And it is as a result of the fact that many of the places in which we get components for the supercomputers and the things that we need to build are still using grids that are based on non-renewable energy. And in particular, more than 50% of most companies' Scope 3 emissions actually come from right here in Asia. And as you look at the different grids, and China's doing super well, we are starting to see an inflection point when it comes to renewable energy. And recently, we've seen in the West and in countries like China, that tipping point where the cost of renewable energy gets to the point where it starts to be more affordable. But we're by no means anywhere close to that point yet for the rest of Asia. And so what we are hoping to do is to ask our partners in markets where we need to build a data center to think about the ways in which renewable energy can unlock the decision to put a data center nearby. Put it differently, if you were making a decision about where to put a data center that's going to suck up some of the Earth's resources, and there was no sovereign data issue, and we had zero latency, and we had the ability to transport electrons from one part of the world to the other, but not electricity, you would always locate your data centers next to a place that could generate energy renewably and cleanly rather than not. And yet it is the distortions of sovereign data and obviously geography that make us think differently. But in the competition for where the compute and where the intelligence of what it takes to take advantage of AI occurs, the solution is find a way to create more renewable energy, and you will find a way to be more convincing as a destination, not just for DCs, but for this whole AI wave. And I firmly believe that AI is unlocked faster with renewable energy, and we are consciously trying to hit our 2030 commitments, we and many other companies like ours. And the only way we're going to do that is in partnership with large public sector entities and private sector entities that are delivering renewable energy at scale so that we can eventually get there. I think we may be the first company to ever sign a power purchase agreement with a nuclear fusion company that's due to be coming online in 27. And I may be wrong in terms of whether it's fusion or fission, but it's super interesting to see that if a large buyer of an energy says, I'm only going to buy renewable energy or a mix that's mostly renewable, it changes behaviors, it changes economics of the market.
Yeah, for sure. You talked about Asia's energy needs. Can we just talk about the US energy needs for a second? Because my understanding is a lot of the data centers, a lot of the compute will be in the US. And I've been reading articles about how in vast parts of the US, energy demand is outstripping supply. California is an exception, but there are others where this issue is becoming a bit of a conundrum for those who want to pursue as fast expansion of Gen AI related models and compute, and those who want to sort of balance it out from a carbon footprint perspective.
Yep, I'm not as familiar with the state by state potential for renewable energy as I probably should be, but I will go back to the idea that it is lumpy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The future's already here, it just isn't evenly distributed yet. And if you think about the simple logic of hours of sunlight and draw that as a curve, it may closely match the potential for data center deployment,
Sure.
with the exception of course, of wind. But fundamentally, as you look at the southern states and the ones that have more sunlight, it tells you, I think it gives you a clue as to where PV, which is actually getting more efficient at close to a rate, if not faster, than the compute power required, gets us there. And I think that gives me promise for the global south, Timur. Places like where you and I and our parents grew up, places that we have visited, where you think about where is there going to be potential. And we just announced a $1 billion investment through G42 in Kenya. And there are places like Iran and Pakistan, there are places that have many, many days of sun that could potentially turn that into future power. So answering the question simply, it's probably PV that is a clue as to where the potential will be. But what you said about America is probably true about every other nation in the world, with few exceptions that just simply have exceptional renewable power potential.
Right. Earlier, you made that point about Jarvis versus Terminator. I want to come back to that point because there's a broader discussion about the dystopian AI scenarios and the utopian scenarios. So what state of future do you think about, Zia, on a day-to-day basis?
I do believe that we will have a guarded, stepwise approach to how we think about these bigger things around AI, principles around fairness, which I've somewhat alluded to, this idea around transparency and accountability, if you will. Whenever we put out a product at Microsoft, it goes through a second review around reliability and safety. Plus, we have more safeguards around privacy and security than we ever have. So the principles that we have around how we deploy are going to act as a natural governor for how we do it and why we do it. And I think that is something that we will share with the industry, with our partners, and with other tech companies. And how we'll do there is we're going to do skilling, and we're going to do testing and tools and training to make sure that the way it's implemented is the right way. And of course, there's oversight around compliance and auditing, reporting, monitoring, and we're going to build tools to help people figure out just how they're using AI. I think, though, that where it's going, the root of the question is this idea of optimism, that the optimism in terms of how a new group of agents that's 1 billion or 2 billion strong, that you don't have to pay any money, but basically deliver work that nobody wants to do, that just simply creates value in places that then allows us to shift to other activities. It's really the most interesting part for me. And I'll go back to health outcomes because it's something I've thought about over the years in my personal family issues around health and how we might improve the way in which we look at orphan diseases or even simple things like early detection of cancer. And we've seen so many companies that look at and see the hardware infrastructure we have today, when you apply smarter software and AI to it, will provide an assist. It's a great word, an assist to a well-meaning, thoughtful, technology-oriented doctor to be able to say, you know what, I don't see a shadow in the JPEG version of that file, if you will. But if you look at the raw version of the file, of that image that was created, going back to like the DSLR metaphor, in that raw image, 99 times out of 100, that thing that you see is actually a shadow, and AI thinks that it could be something that is worth investigating further, doctor. Here's an assist. And that level of Jarvis-like augmentation of what you could potentially identify at scale through simply imaging and diagnostics around healthcare outcomes starts to change your not just way of work, but the way in which you think about maybe even longevity and mortality and the delivery of healthcare in a variety of different contexts. These are the reasons why I'm just, much more optimistic than I am any other adjective. We can't quite understand how some of our best partners, and it's actually the biggest customers, are thinking about using these tools to come up with something that's really quite exciting. And I'm going to go back to creation just for a second, because I think that the most exciting part of one of the most exciting parts about 8 to 10 years from now, Timur, is going to be just the wide variety of content and craft that we'll be able to see. So there was a Korean weblet. Think of it like a animated web drama. They used to put out an episode every 2 weeks. Immediately after the launch of GenAI, what they were able to do is to use background shading and other types of tools to go from an episode every 2 weeks to 2 episodes per week. So it's a 4 times throughput of the amount of content that they could create. So you can be more imaginative and focus more on the story, more on the narrative, more on maybe even the merchandising. But the truth is that that productivity gain of 4x just comes from basically doing things that humans used to have to do in background shading and now get delivered, so that you releases the people it takes to build that story, that drama, into doing things that are perhaps even more creative. So we will live in a horn of plenty when it comes to content. We'll have a variety of different ways of thinking about how we might use this tool to create more. And yet there's going to be stumbles along the way where we ask ourselves, wait, are we being inclusive? Is this fair? Is this, we have the right accountability? So I don't think that it's wrong for us to constantly check to make sure that we're doing all the right things, but that the optimism that I have for how it might unlock in the real world is rooted in things that we're already seeing in this year 2 of 10.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we have a problem of too little as far as content is concerned. We probably have a problem of plenty already, but
Yeah.
I hope that we get a quality, quantity, optimal mix going forward. And while I fully appreciate that, companies like Microsoft are trying to instill, without any nudge necessarily from policymakers, a system of governance and internal cross checks, it is true that through waves of transformative technology, when the disruption takes place, regulators and regulation sort of struggle to keep up with the pace of change. And I think the last 20 years, with the internet revolution to the social media proliferation, I think there have been failings at times to protect consumer privacy, fake news, election interference, etc. So how should we balance the imperative of the business to go out and innovate and come up with products for their customers and public interest, which are not necessarily always aligned?
Yeah, I think that you refer to some really big disappointments, and speaking personally about what the internet could have been. And I think that there is an element of being thoughtful around safeguards that, as an industry plus the public sector, we could have done to make sure that we protect children or identity. As we go forward, I think that working together on a set of standards with the industry and governments in lockstep is important. And there's this data that came from Oliver Wyman. I'm looking at it right now. It was done with across 16 countries. And I don't mean it to refer to less regulation is good, but if you look at the question of how often are you using generative AI in your current job, 3 out of the top 5 are right here. India, Indonesia, and Singapore are 1, 3, and 5 on that list, with UAE and Brazil being 2 and 4. And so you look at that, you say, is it the global south? Is it a light touch regulation? Or is it optimism again? Is it an optimism that I, here in India, can basically improve my productivity by using a tool? In Indonesia, I can basically become multilingual immediately by using tools. Or Singapore or UAE leaning forward in their governments and saying we need to experiment to think about ways in which we can embrace this tool versus, I hate to say it, dead last on this list. You have any guesses, Timur?
Don't say US.
Canada.
Really?
US middle of the pack, 46. Canada's the worst. Australia close second. UK third. Why? Why so much suspicion? I ask my Canadian relatives all the time. There's just this worry about, oh, you can't use that in school. You can't just instantly use a calculator. Do you think about research? Do you ask it some questions? I have a Canadian friend. We both work for big tech companies now outside of Canada. But we asked the question about something that we've been thinking about since we were teenagers. And it's so interesting how generative AI comes up with a better mathematical answer to that today than when we were young and we were using simulation and other tools. And just full disclosure, he's at Google. And he asked the question, do you think this is better than 99% of humans? I said, I'm not sure it is yet. And then he said, you know what? It must be because it's better than you at solving this problem. And I laughed and I said, yeah, you're probably right. And so the problem is something you might see at work. It might be something that you see in school. It might be something you see in your research lab. But if you're not using a tool that just help you solve that problem a little bit faster, then what are you doing? So you can't shut it off. You can't say, no, we're not going to have generative AI. You have to think about this tool in the right context with the right safeguards in order to unlock the economy. So, I'm going to get a lot of flame from friends in Canada, but we need to think about why is it that India and Indonesia are 1 and 3? What is it that UAE is doing that's gotten our attention, and certainly Singapore as well? And let's not forget, let me just count this off. China is 8th, which is pretty good out of 16. And there seems to be a cliff after China where 60% of the people use it, according to this Oliver Wyman study. So not sure I fully answered your question, but I say embrace it, have safeguards, don't be afraid of it because it does actually help you do your job.
Fascinated by that survey. Very interesting. I want to ask you the question maybe I could have started this whole conversation with, because these days GenAI, OpenAI, and Microsoft are almost synonymous. So tell us the depth and the breadth of the relationship and what's next in this collaboration.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here is that Microsoft has multiple partners in generative AI. And we have made partnerships with companies like Mistral in Europe. We saw G42, UAE, not just the language model companies, but companies that are doing great work on top of the model as well. We made an investment in a company called Hidden Layer that does cybersecurity to help protect your model, to make sure that it is not assailed and corrupted by bad actors who will try to taint what it is that you tell people is the next best word. But it does all start with our first relationship with OpenAI many years ago, right? I mean, it wasn't just a year and a half ago. Our first partnership with them was more, let's gather a signal from this group of people that are coming out of Y Combinator. And then Sam started to run the company, things started to take off with the transformer model, to the point where we had a moment where we had to make a decision as to whether or not we make that big bet. And that was just before ChatGPT. We made the big bet, that big partnership with OpenAI. And then since then, we've made other bets, which are also very big, around how we might think about generative AI more broadly. But certainly, the ChatGPT moment should not be underestimated for what it unlocked. And we continue to be not just on their board, but also the beneficiary that every time you do a search on or a query or a prompt or on OpenAI, it hits our servers in the back end. So we're obviously a beneficiary of being the one that does the supercomputer. But that's the case for so many other models as well. So that we can be in a, not quite frenemy, but in a collaboration and cooperation. It's like competition with even other models. And so it isn't perhaps as synonymous as you might say, but we are clearly a strong partner of theirs and a beneficiary of when they innovate, we benefit and everyone benefits. But there are other sources of innovation. Back to, it's just unevenly distributed.
A year from now, will you and I be able to do a podcast in English and have it simultaneously translated in Bengali?
It already is in place. So we invested in Sarvam, which is a company that we put some thought into Sarvam. I'll be a little bit more clear. and some resources into a company that basically helps us translate into 19 Indic languages. I think right now, Hindi, Bengali, Urdu are probably already covered by our Live Teams app. So this is on Zoom, but if had it been on Teams, it would have been real-time Bengali, Bangla translation with voice if we wanted it to be. I use this tool perhaps more than any other tool. Just the ability to say, what did I miss? When was the name Zia mentioned? Did anyone tell a joke? Did anyone tell a joke about Zia? And then, it's just so interesting to think about how we can very quickly query what has been said and understand it independent of language now. So we're already there. If you say, what's the 1 year from now thing that you think might be unlocked that we won't be able to do? I'm going to go back to teaching. I think there's a possibility that something that our 11 or 14-year-old learn will, through the tool, will far exceed what it took us many, many years of education and living on this planet to get good at. And we will be shocked at how quickly our kids are able to do specific things for which we have absolutely no clue how they learned how to do that. It is an element of magic to all great innovation, right? And the ability to use this tool to do so many new interesting things, I think, is unwritten.
I am waiting for that infinitely patient and infinitely empathetic instructor. I'm really, really waiting for, not just for my son, but for myself as well. I'm sure there are a bunch of things that I could learn, and I would need a very patient teacher for that. Zia, I so much appreciate you coming on the show, and this is a very, very valuable and insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's long overdue. Thanks again.
Thank you, and thanks to our listeners and viewers as well. Kopi Time was produced by Ken Delbridge at Splice Studios. Violet Lee and Daisy Sharma provided additional assistance. It is for information only and does not represent any investment advice. All 126 episodes of Kopi Time are available on Apple, Google, and Spotify, as well as YouTube. As for our research publications, webinars, and live streams, you can find them all by Googling DBS Research Library. Have a great day.